Hello, property nomads. Hope you're well. A mortgage liquidity crisis is brewing. There are plenty of things that are happening under the covers, so to speak. And these are things that people either don't want you to know about or that they think it's not that important to know. But a mortgage liquidity crisis that is potentially around the corner is very, very dangerous for everyone involved, because that could have massive impacts on mortgage lending and what rates you get and the time frame that you get. So it could have a massive impact on your portfolios, your mortgages moving forward. So it comes from an article from the Telegraph, and it's saying that Blackstone Mortgage Trust is at a risk of liquidity crisis, which could then spread through the rest of the world. Blackstone is ginormous as a private equity giant, and reportedly it is at the risk of a cash crunch, and that's according to the hedge fund Muddy Waters. What this means is that there's a lot of issues in the commercial sector, because this is a sector that people have identified has a lot of challenges moving forward. And we've said the same thing on the podcast as well. Again, if we look at the last few years, what's happened, we've had a lot of movements to work from home. And if people are working from home, then they don't need office or office spaces. If they don't need office spaces, then that lowers the demand. And with all these mortgage level interest levels increasing, when the landlords or the owners come to refinance, the cost of doing so is incredibly high, and you get into this death spiral, as we've said before. So the challenge that we've now got is that a lot of these massive players, a lot of these big companies, are heavily invested in the commercial property sector, and when they come around to refinancing, or they're not getting their rents in, etc., it's just going to create a big issue. And that's what's been bubbling away under the surface. And when that comes to fruition, and when cracks start to appear, then that's when the house of cards will fall down. And that's effectively what this article is saying. It's also what we've said on the podcast before. So the hedge fund Muddy Waters, they have basically said that commercial property companies which have borrowed money from Blackstone's trust could struggle to pay the cash back amid soaring interest rates, which has increased the cost of repaying loans. Supposedly, the trust has more than 200 loans, although it's mostly linked to US office property. There are some elements of that in the UK sector. And it goes through what I've just said as well. So working from home's left many offices empty. That decreases the value of said buildings, and all of the above. What Muddy Waters has said, and I quote, "It is at a good risk of a liquidity crisis. This is not a story where bad people have done bad things. They are just unlucky. Blackstone may modify the loans, but it's such a big number of loans terminating next year that it will not be able to be swept under the rug." End quote. And this is important, because if you've had the misfortune of refinancing from one of your recent mortgages, so maybe that mortgage was at 2 or 3%, maybe 4%, and you've just remortgaged and you've hit a rate at 6% or 7% or whatever it might be, you would have known, or you would have seen in the numbers, a relatively large increase in your mortgage amount. Now, maybe you're able to offset that with increasing the rent, especially in the residential sector, because the supply and demand economics are working in landlords' favours. So you might have been able to offset that. Whereas on the commercial side, that's not as easy to do, because again, more and more companies are working from home. The demand isn't quite there. So when you come to refinancing, the proverbial's going to hit the fan, and that's why it is almost a ticking time bomb. And this is why we are at potentially a brink of a liquidity crisis in the commercial property sector. And although predominantly that would hit the US first, that could easily find its way across to the UK and other parts of the world. The fact that Muddy Waters, the hedge fund, has said that the trust could be hit by losses on its loan book of up to 4.5 billion is alarming. And also the fact that he says, or they say, that the shares are at risk of also being completely wiped out. So yes, they're painting a doomy picture. I'd always say to that with hedge funds, what's their ulterior motive? So maybe take it with a slight pinch of salt. But the main nooks and crannies of this episode is that the commercial property sector is under fire. There's a lot of loans that are due back in 2024. And even if they're refinanced or remortgaged, they're going to be faced with much higher rates, which of course means higher overheads. And then again, that death spiral just gets into full force. And that could have a big impact moving forwards. And this is also a story that a lot of people aren't really talking about, but it's important. This is why we record such content like this, because it's imperative that we have an understanding of what is going on behind the scenes and what we're not really being told in the mainstream media. That caveat being said, this article did come from the Telegraph, and that is my caveat on that. But let's just see what happens. 2024 is going to be a very interesting year, to say the least. We will see what happens. In terms of Christmas and New Year, just to let you know, we will have episodes out on Christmas Day, New Year's Day. They are going to be Christmas messages and New Year messages. So don't worry, appreciate you're going to want to have time with your family, eat your turkey or your Christmas meal, and enjoy the festive period. But we will have podcasts being released on those days. They are going to be very Happy New Year and Happy Christmas messages. So nothing too intrusive. The podcast on the 28th of December, that's going to be a recap of the 2023 predictions with Mark Champ of War Financial. So that will be definitely worth listening to. You can see how right or wrong we were with regards to our 2023 predictions. And then from the 4th of January, yes, we are back. Usual schedule, Thursdays, Mondays. And then we're going to be looking at gold again, and then also differences between investors and landlords. We also have a plethora of interviews lined up for next year. We've got some great things going on, talking inheritance tax, talking money mechanics, property development, apart hotels as well. So a really lot of great exclusive podcast content coming your way. As always, thank you very much for listening to Property Nomads. We do urge you to do us a big favor and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already done so. Happy Christmas, Happy New Year. We will be back on the 25th of December with a Christmas message for you. Thank you for all your support this year as well, and see you in the next episode.